Hello, welcome to About Books, and today we have Tim Quinn with us. Tim Quinn, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be back at Right Blend.
Yes, it's lovely to have you here. Your book, this is the reason why we're here, your autobiography, this one right here.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought? Great, really enjoyed it. As you know, I've personally reviewed it and given it a thumbs up. Laughed from cover to cover. Huh. So let's start a little bit on what you can tell us about it. The cover.
Yeah, it's not my choice. I sent the publisher about 100 pictures, photos, and I like the publisher. They brought a book out of mine last year and it sold out, thanks to them. I didn't do anything. I just sat at home and the book sold out, thanks to the work they did. I loved the way they designed the books. So while I wrote every word, I was more than happy for them to design it in any way they wanted. And I was surprised when I saw the picture they'd chosen for the cover. I thought there were other pictures that would have probably ended up on the cover. But in actual fact, it's very close to my heart, that photo. It's the day I left the music hall. And the music hall is really where I found myself. It's an old theatre in Leeds called the City Varieties. And after leaving school here in Crosby, I didn't have a clue who I was until I walked into, backstage at the City Varieties music hall. So it's kind of interesting that they chose that picture because that was a turning point for me. And I'm more than happy that that is representing me on the cover of the book. Kind of makes sense.
Yeah, we'll look at that a little bit further on. I mean, I think it was 1972 when you progressed then on to working with DC Comics.
DC Thompson, yeah.
DC Thompson.
Lots of people make that mistake. They think, oh, DC Thompson. DC is Superman, Batman over in the US. DC Thompson is ours, Scotland's. The Beano, Dandy, Bunty, Tapia-Bowes. Say a funny word, chances are there was a comic attached to that word. And that's really where my comic book career started, with those guys up in Dundee.
Well, before we move on to that, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your childhood, because one of the favourite chapters that I read has a picture of you as a small child and you're drawing, and you make reference to your mum, your lovely mum, who handed you a piece of chalk and said, go and draw on the walls if you'd like to. Or, you know, she really sort of embraced your creativity, didn't she, as a child? She
did, yeah. Mum was nuts in the nicest possible way, and I'm and Liverpool nuts. So, you know, it doesn't get any better than that. And my very earliest memory on this planet is her putting a stick of charcoal in my hand on the day we moved into a big old Victorian house and saying, go and draw on the wall in your bedroom. Her plan was that she would redecorate soon. Typically with Mum, she redecorated about 10 years later. By then, the walls, and indeed even the ceiling, were covered in drawings, and those drawings told stories. So it came to me very naturally. I was 2 when I started. My earliest memory is creating a character, very simple character. And as soon as I had that, I could tell stories. So yeah, thanks, Mum, a lot.
Very creative family, because I think all of you, including your 2 brothers, Jason and Michael, I think you all had that type of mentality. You enjoyed life so much, didn't you? You had a lovely upbringing with your mum and dad.
I was very lucky.
And your granddad as well.
Yeah, it was a perfect family, and a perfect Liverpool family. Really, a real mix of all sorts of strange people, but all with good heart and lovely. And it was our home. You know, Liverpool was our home. And we've been here since about 1800, I think, when we came over from Ireland. So, and it was a great period to grow up in. You know, I was growing up in the 50s and early 60s, and as anybody who was here at the time will remember, that was a fascinating time to be in Liverpool, because there was music coming from every door, but it wasn't only music. It was the artists and writers and poets and musicians, of course, were coming to the fore, and everywhere you went, something exciting was happening, apart from at my school. Where absolutely nothing exciting was happening at all. They were still stuck back in the 1890s. In fact, my textbooks at school in the 1950s and early 60s were printed in the 1890s, so they had not moved on, and nor had the thinking really of the school. I have a school prospectus from 1958, and it says, "We will instill the fear of God in your child." And that was the selling point at the school at that time. You know, this is history. And for me, this is one of the reasons I did do this book, because it was strange when I was asked to do my autobiography, because, you know, there are a lot of people out there who are slightly more famous than me. But then I started thinking back through my life and realizing that, you know, so much of it now is history. You go back to the 50s. In many ways, it's Victorian times. You know, there's a lot of people wandering around who were around in Victorian times. And I suddenly saw that certainly the way I worked in the publishing world back then is completely different to how it is today. And suddenly it became very interesting for me to write this book and to try and capture those periods and those changes from the 50s up to the present day.
School times.
Joy.
Not so pleasant as
I got a withered left hand, as you can see, and it's from getting the strap so many times from the Irish Christian brothers who were determined to beat the fear of God into me. They didn't succeed, actually, because I have no fear of God. I have a great fear of Irish Christian brothers, but not of God. So, yeah, school. Didn't do a lot for me. You know, I don't blame them. I mean, I was obviously going in a different way to what they would have said was a much better life, really. You know, get a proper job was what they were all about. And a proper job back then was be a politician or a bank manager. So it's kind of funny, really, that, you know, as a cartoonist and a writer for comic books, the job I took is the one today that is probably looked on more fondly by the mass of people, you know. Certainly politicians and bank managers are not really looked on that fondly, I don't think that. So for me, I don't know really I think I was in my first confession when I realised that I wasn't going to go this direction, you know. And it was, I was 7 years of age, and the priest said, "So tell me your sins." And the only thing I could think of was I hadn't taken my medicine that day, because I was on a course of medicine to help me grow, which, as you can see, I didn't take. And so I said to him, "I didn't take my medicine today." And he said, "Say 2 Hail Marys and Our Father, and I forgive you the sin of not taking your medicine." And I remember sitting there thinking, "Oh, come on," like as if, you know. And it was at that point that I realised, you know, all the man-made mumbo-jumbo connected to that particular faith at that time. But more than that, just when I walked out of the confessional and saw the world in a different way, and are you crazy, you know? So yeah, so I thank the Christian brothers, because they guided me in their own peculiar way into the life I chose.
I think you said at that point you were never going to go back to confession ever again.
Yeah, well, no doubt on my deathbed I'll change my mind, and then all my sins will be absolved, and I'll be straight into heaven, or purgatory. I think you go first, and then limbo, and then... So yeah.
Yeah, lots of
the
fun.
get out of jail free God is hanging over. Can't imagine it at this moment, but, you know, I'm not dying at this moment, so we shall see.
So they had a bit of a habit of referring to you as a clown, and there's an obvious link with that, with where you go on to after you leave school.
I had one...
It sounded quite cruel the way they...
Well, it was. This was the education system back then. You know, it was a perk of teachers that they could take it out on certain kids, and there was a particular teacher who decided to call me a clown every lesson, which was odd, because I wasn't. I was not cracking jokes all the time. You know, I was sat at the back looking out the window, disappearing. I didn't want to be there, but I was not, I did not cause problems in the class. I just didn't do anything. So I started, and for some reason, this particular teacher decided to call me a clown regularly. And it sank in. So that come the day I left school, the day after I left school, I thought, what should I do? Because I didn't have a clue. I should have known. It was obvious, because all I'd been doing over the last 10 years was drawing pictures and reading comics and telling stories in pictures about weird little characters. So it was pretty obvious, but it didn't click. It's not like today where, you know, oh, I'm going to work for a comic, go on the internet and find out how to track them down. You know, now it's easy. Back then, how on earth, how can you do that? I didn't know. So the day after leaving school, I thought, well, I've got to get a job. And on a whim, keep in mind it's the 60s, so on a whim, we did things on a whim back then, I got on a coach and went up coast to Blackpool, and knocked on the stage door of Blackpool Tower Circus. The stage door was opened by a clown. Surprise, surprise. Now, I'm assuming the reason I did that was because of this teacher saying, "You're a clown, you're a clown." I had no real desire to become a clown. I didn't even see myself as one. But I thought, well, it might be fun if I can get a job in the circus. Anyway, it was opened by Charlie Caroli, world famous clown of the period. And I said, "Any jobs going?" And he took me in, and much to my surprise, took me to his dressing room and painted my face white. And a day after leaving St Mary's College in Crosby, I was a clown in Blackpool Tower Circus, running in and out of the ring, which proved to be great. I mean, I was not a natural clown. I wasn't any good. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, you put a face on and the nose and the funny hair, which I had, and yeah, funny costume, then you're a clown. No, there's more to it than that. You know, a natural clown is a glorious thing to be, you know, and people like Charlie Caroli, he's a clown. He was a clown. Charlie Chaplin, a clown. You know, I think you have to be born with it. I really do. But my job as part of his troupe was just to run in the ring and throw water and try to hit them or not hit him and his fellow clowns, professional clowns. On that first day, I do remember something happening that in a way changed my life completely, because running into the ring, it looks like there's 1,000 people all around cheering and shouting and screaming with laughter. And at some point, Charlie came over to me, pulled my trousers down, pulled my underpants out and poured a bucket of water in. And I'm 16 years of age, full of zero confidence. And yet there I am with people screaming with laughter because my undies are out here. And I'm just soaking wet. And I remember at that point thinking, well, I'll never be embarrassed again about anything, will I? You know, I won't feel self-conscious. So it's something I would suggest to every 16-year-old. Go and stand in the middle of a crowd and get somebody to pull your undies up and pour a bucket of water in, because it did do me good.
You got on well with him, didn't you? He was very good to
I
you.
am grateful to Charlie Caroli, because at the end of the season he came to me and said, "So do you know what you are yet?" He clicked that I hadn't a clue what I should be. And I said, "No, but I know I'm not a clown." And he patted me on the back. He said, "Well done, you're on the road, because you know what you're not." And he invited me to come to a musical, Leeds, up in Leeds, City Varieties musical, where he was going into panto for the season. And he said, "You might get a job backstage, you know, as a stagehand." And I went up to Leeds because I had nothing else planned. And as soon as I walked through the stage door there, I knew I'd found myself. It was just the warmth. This is, I think, the world's oldest musical. And it was the timing was perfect. The BBC were there filming a series called The Good Old Days every week. And they had amazing artists on, like Ken Dodd, Arthur Askey, Ted Ray, Albert Modley, people who'd been in the business since the 20s. And I learned a lot just working there. And at some point I started writing scripts for the comedians. And that gave me a belief in myself. And that's what you need. And that's what you need in school. You need that to be instilled in you. Who are you? What are you? What can you do? What do you do? What do you want to do? Suddenly I found it. Because to write a script for a comedian, to have them walk out on stage and to hear the laughs, my head exploded many times, you know. And they were nice people walking into that scene. Bear in mind, up to now I'd been working along with Irish Christian brothers, and then circus folk, who are a different breed entirely. Now I'm in with theatrical folk, and they were sort of rogues and vagabonds, or musical types. And they took my heart completely, because I was one of them, natural rogue and a vagabond. And they introduced me to their world, and certainly I'm very grateful to that, for that, because everything came off from that. Everything,
back of that.
Right up to sitting here today and writing this book. All of this has happened because I knocked on Charlie Caroli's stage door all those years ago. One thing led to another, to another, to another, to another. You know, couldn't have sat there at school and planned it out. But that's how it happened. And it was only in the writing of this book that I was able to piece it all together, because I'd been too busy living it. suddenly sitting down and thinking back, how did it all start? Tracing it back. And I realised it all started because I knocked on that stage door. And I met somebody who was kind enough to look at a little tatty-haired Liverpudlian who hadn't got a clue and take them under their wing and push them in what proved to be the right direction for me, you know. So yeah, life's weird, isn't it?
You met some incredible people there, and some...
Been very lucky, yeah.
Yeah,
to be this close to Arthur Askey, watching him, you know, walk out on stage, and somebody who by that time had been in the business, you know, I mean, he's just such a fantastic artist. And Ken Dodd, I mean, you know, who I've always loved. I mean, yeah, I'm bowled over every time I look back at all the names that I've been lucky enough to work
Windsor,
with. All my heroes.
past, naked.
Barbara Windsor. Barbara Windsor. Now, if you think of Barbara Windsor in Carry On Camping, and when she does the, you know, and I saw that movie and thought, why don't they freeze frame? And did they? No, they didn't. So it's got that one viewing. It's not like now where you got YouTube and you can whiz back and forth. But yeah, Barbara came with her gangster friends, descended on the theatre one day because she was appearing in the good old days. And again, I think I was about 17 by then. And I'm walking up to the flies to pull up a cloth or drop a cloth. And who should walk out of her dressing room? Barbara Windsor. And she says the immortal words to me, "Hello, darling." That would have been more than enough. It was a bonus that she happened to be stark naked at the time. Sadly, I was fully clothed, but there you go. My eyes were opened because it hadn't been like this at St Mary's College. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Charlie Caroli.
And Eartha Kitt.
Oh,
sharing
Eartha
a passionate
Kitt.
moment.
Even
with
as you
Eartha
say
Kitt.
the words, Eartha Kitt. Yeah, I mean, anybody out there who's seen Eartha as Catwoman in Batman, the Batman TV series way back, or just singing An Old-Fashioned Girl. She was not an old-fashioned girl, let me tell you. And again, our paths collided. And although it was just one night that we met, she is with me forevermore, and that will never be forgotten. Oh, to be 17 and in the presence of Eartha Kitt. Am I a lucky boy or what? And I'm from Crosby. I mean, that's what blows me away at times. I'm a little boy from Crosby, and I've been lucky enough to encounter these wonders of the world, of which Eartha Kitt was most certainly one.
And not much stopped you from admiring somebody from the opposite gender. You mentioned there's something that's quite funny in your book about Dusty Springfield. The fact that she was gay didn't stop you from falling in love with her, and some sort of cartoon character that you liked as well.
Yeah. I didn't care. I was going to fall in love with anybody. It didn't bother me. But yeah, Dusty Springfield was the first love, I think, of my life, after my first dog. Does that sound offensive to Dusty? It's not meant to be, because I adore Dusty. But yeah, it was not to be, sadly. I think the age difference, I think I was about 6 and she was 20-something. And lesbianism got in the way.
It would, I suppose.
Not for me, it wouldn't have, but you know. So there you go. What can you do? You know.
So from then on, we're getting close to 1972. That's sort of the beginning, from what I can trace, of like literally almost a 45-year career in starting to work with comics, beginning over here, moving over to America, moving back. So how did you end up moving to Scotland and starting to work?
Well, I was working in the theatre, and suddenly 1,000 comics were delivered. 1,000 weekly comics. They'd come from DC Thompson's up in Scotland. They sent the theatre 1,000 comic books, old issues. They wanted them to hand them out to kids during the panto as a freebie. And that was great, you know. So every kid who'd come to see the panto would get a free comic. Fantastic. Well, I'm sat backstage between shows one day, and I pick up one of these comics. Bear in mind, I'm an old boy now. I'm at least 17. So I'm looking at this issue, a comic called Sparky, which I'd loved when I was a kid. And I'm thinking, oh, I remember Hungry Horace, I remember Pansy Potter and Peter Piper, great characters. And then I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, I could do this. indeed, while I'd been at school, I had actually started a comic book. Me and a few friends, we put out a comic every week for about 3 weeks. But hey, we did it. And so I gave myself a task. I thought, okay, sitting at the theatre during the afternoon, every day from now through the next month, I will draw a complete story about Hungry Horace. And I gave myself a whole month. So at the end of the month, I had 31 pages. And I then looked through them all, and I got rid of them all apart from 4. So I was editing myself, which is a great thing for any writer or, or illustrator to do. And I bundled up the 4 that were left, because I thought they're the only ones that are any good, and sent them off to the address on the back page of the comic, saying, any use? And a week or so later, I got a reply in the form of a cheque for 2 of them, and I couldn't believe it. I was published. 2 of my stories they'd taken, and they also said in the letter, if you're ever in Dundee, come and see us. I remember that weekend. I mean, I was walking on air because it was so right for me. I got 2 stories about Hungry Horace, a character that had run since the 30s. And they're going to appear in every newsagent's across the land. Me. In a comic that I used to buy when I was a kid. To this day, because that's the greatest buzz I think I've ever had in publishing. It's fantastic, So I was on the next coach up really to Dundee, and went to the home of the Beano and Dandy and Bunty and all the rest, which is this old Gothic pile. An extraordinary place, out of which some of the most subversive stories aimed at kids have been produced. And then they were doing countless weekly comics at that point. So if you could hold a pencil, you were in really, and tell a story, which I could. So I started writing and drawing for all sorts of things at that point. Lots and lots of their weeklies, and thoroughly enjoying myself. And learning as I went. And whenever I would enter the office, I would meet some of the old style cartoonists who might be there, delivering their work. And these were heroes of mine, people whose work I'd loved as a kid and still do.
I think there's a nice photo of the late Sir Terry Wogan holding one of your comic books in the book, which is really nice. Yeah,
Terry was very sweet. I think I just bumped into him at some point and got him to do something for this comic book. I can't quite remember what. This was fairly early on in his career. I mean, he was certainly well known in the UK. But I'll never forget, again, some little bumbling twit coming up to him, and he was busy, and he was remarkably sweet. So yeah, one of the good guys. One of the good guys. I've been very lucky. I've met all my heroes, and pretty much all of them. They say don't meet your heroes because they won't live up to. Well, they all have, apart from one. You should remain nameless.
I was going to say, tell us about it. This is the time to tell us all about it. So then, I think we're getting closer to 1978 when you meet Dickie Howard, and of course,
Dickie Howard,
the other half of
the other half of
Let me turn this the right way around.
Thank you.
He is here. Here he is.
Yeah, I should explain. This is a strange book, and the way it came about was strange. Dickie and I, he's a cartoonist, and we met in '78, I think it was, and we teamed up. And we worked in a similar way. We churned stuff out, lots of it. We loved what we were doing. We churned it out. And we got on pretty well, even though we're quite different to each other. And we both wanted to do quite different stuff to what was appearing in comics at that time. And that's what we did. That's exactly what we did. This book has come about because the publisher put out a collection of our work together last year, and that's the book that sold out. And then he said, right, I want you to sit down now and do your autobiography, you two. And the way that developed, we both wrote our story separately. Because Dickie had worked on his Todd for many years before we met, And he worked on his Todd for many years after we stopped working together. And the same for me. I'd done a lot of stuff before. So our two stories were quite separate, and the coming together in the middle of the story, we found when we each wrote our halves of this book, we found that we wrote about it in a different way. So the book worked. The publishing company didn't have to edit anything out or suggest we insert something to explain something. So it's what's known as a flip book. You flip it over, and one half you've got my tale, you flip it over, on the other you've got Dickie's tale, and we meet in the middle. So quite a remarkable piece of design, really, and it works.
It definitely works. It's similar tales, but told totally different.
Well, we are totally different, in so many ways. But
you're so compatible as well. I mean, your work is, just worked really, really well, didn't it? It did, and it's quite funny to read his take on things that we did together. For me now, particularly after all these years afterwards, and he's a good guy. I mean, I loved his work. I remember the first time I saw it, and it was like, whoa, a smack in the face, but in the nicest possible way, snowball in the face. Yeah, you said you really, really liked it. There's obviously a mutual respect between you both. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with Doctor Who? Because you worked together for such a while.
That takes me back to Crosby and living here as a boy, and that amazing day, November the 23rd, 1963. So the day after Kennedy had been shot. And all there was on the news, of course, was news coming in from Dallas. And then into that gloom came this gloomy show, Doctor Who, which I think the opening scene is a junkyard, and it's all foggy and misty, and it's November setting. It's so perfect. And it's this extraordinary story about this guy who can travel through time and space. Completely different kettle of fish to how Doctor Who is today. And to be there at that time and to see this story unfold, I mean, it never to be forgotten. Again, another never to be forgotten moment in my life. So I loved Doctor Who. I was the perfect age when it started. I was just turned 10. Absolutely perfect for watching that. And when we started, Dickie and I started working for Marvel Comics, who were reprinting a lot of their work in the UK. But Marvel had the brilliant idea of putting out a Doctor Who magazine. No British publisher had done that for some reason. It was a very obvious thing to do. And we approached them with the idea of doing a little spoof strip about Doctor Who, which would go on the letters page each issue. Spoof, but done from the heart, because it was a programme we both loved. And we found that there was so much material there that we could look at in a humorous way. And much to our surprise, the strip ran for nearly 15 years, I think, during which time we probably hit every Doctor up to that point in one way or another, and all the companions and all the monsters and so on. And it was a very easy, fun strip to do. And to my delight, it sort of garnered a very big readership, who liked our take on Doctor Who and weren't offended by it. I think my first thought was people might get offended by it because we're taking the mickey slightly. But I think they saw that it was done with good heart because we loved the show, and if we ever did put the boot in at all, it tended to be for the production side of things rather than the show itself.
So how do you end up working for Marvel Comics? I mean, that's quite an incredible
It
job,
is, particularly if you think, we're sitting here in South Road, Waterloo, in this Right Blend bookshop. And this is a street road that I walked up a million times as a boy, buying comics at every place that sold comics. And some of those comics were Marvel comics in the early days, and I loved them. And I loved the work of Stan Lee, all the creations of Stan Lee. He's the guy who created Spider-Man and the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk and Mighty Thor and the Avengers. The list goes on and on. He did, the amount of work he did is actually impossible. He's one of them. He's like Enid Blyton. It can't be done, but he did it, just as she did. Loved him dearly. I went to America because I fell in love with an American. So it helps if you're in America to do that. And while there, I got a job working on a very famous American magazine called the Saturday Evening Post magazine, which had been running since the 1720s, because created by Benjamin Franklin. A general interest magazine, fantastic mag, and I was very lucky to get the job there. While there, I had this brilliant idea. Why don't I approach Stan Lee over at Marvel to do some work for me? So I was working on a particular project at that time, and I sent him a letter in New York. I was in Indiana, the publishing company, and said, Stan, would you like to do some work for the Saturday Evening Post magazine? Well, there was only one thing he could say, yes, because the Saturday Evening Post had become a part of American history, thanks to Benjamin Franklin. Maybe even more thanks to some of the writers and illustrators who had worked on it through the last century. In particular, Norman Rockwell, who captured America as Americans would love it to be, as we'd all love it to be, you know, home and hearth and apple pie and love, really, you know, family. So I got a letter from Stan saying, yeah, I'm in, you know, he wanted to do it. And then we started phone conversations, and so we got on. Turned out Stan actually knew a strip I was doing at that time for a newspaper back home, the Daily Mirror. I was writing a strip called Jane, which had run since the 1930s, a strange strip. But Stan had a fondness for it. So that was good. So after 5 years of working for this magazine, I one day called Stan up in New York and said, anything happening at Marvel? And he said, come and see. So I did. And it was, again, the timing was right. I've been lucky in my timing through my career. They started using a lot of British illustrators, writers, editors at that point. And they opened an office in London, Marvel UK. And so I was jet-setting, backwards and forwards. And there was a lot of money around Marvel at that time. They were experimenting with all sorts of things. So as well as working on all the characters I love, like Spider-Man and the X-Men and all the rest, we were also coming up with other ideas. And something I remember fondly is the Marvel music line, where we brought in musicians and introduced them to our artists and writers to work together, to see what they'd produce. You do anything, I don't care, do anything. And the first guy we brought in was Alice Cooper, and we introduced him to Neil Gaiman, who was one of the writers, and they got on like a house on fire in the nicest possible way, and turned out a fantastic comic book and album as well. And then we were able to approach other musicians of note, saying, Alice has done this, what would you like to do? And we approached the Beatles, or the three surviving Beatles at that point, because John sadly had gone. Rolling Stones, Elton John and Bernie Taupin, and many others. Yeah, so I mean, boy, what a buzz! You know, Marvel was. It was a blast reading those comics here in South Road back in the '60s, but to actually be working with them, you know, was even more of a buzz for me. No 2 days were the same. You know, we'd start work around 7 in the morning, go on till 10 at night, but it was bang like that. You go in with an idea in the morning, it'd be up and running by midday. It was an amazing period to work for them. I feel very lucky. Yeah, very. And it opened all the other doors. The Saturday Evening Post opened up every door in America just about to me.
Yeah.
Marvel opened the rest. You know, to say, oh, I work for that and I work for Marvel. You're in.
How about being a Scouser? Because I think you make reference in your autobiography that being a lad from Liverpool seemed to open doors for you.
It did. Well, that opened the initial door in the US. Yeah, because I went over there for love. Jane, hello. Thank you very much. And once there, I got to get a job. And I had my little portfolio of stuff that I'd done. And I flicked through the yellow pages in Indianapolis and found that the Saturday Evening Post was in town. So I was oh, great, because you know, I knew the history of that magazine. And I rang them up, hoping to get an appointment. And bizarrely, I was put through to the publisher. And I said, look, cartoonist, writer from England, I'm over here. Any chance you got time to see my work? And she said, yeah, come and see us. And I said, right, when? And she said, now? Oh, holy cow. It's my first week in America. You know, back in Britain, it would be like, come and see us next March, you know. So off I go, find this very strange publisher. I've yet to meet a publisher who isn't very strange. And hand her my portfolio, which is full of Beano stuff. What a cheek, because not knocking the Beano, but the magazine, the Saturday Evening Post magazine, was a very sophisticated magazine. And I was a Beano kind of guy, which isn't sophisticated. You know, again, that's not knocking it. Its beauty is that it's not sophisticated, that there's a tattiness to it, if you like, but a great tattiness. So I handed her my book. She flicked through it really fast and then handed it back and said, I don't know anything about humour. Boy, was she right there, as I was to find out. She said, but you're obviously from England. Where are you from? And I said, well, Liverpool, originally Liverpool. And everything stopped. You're from Liverpool? I said, yeah. She said, how'd you like to start work on Monday? I said, doing what? And she went, oh, you can be our humour editor. You're supposed to be funny from Liverpool, aren't you? Word on the street is we're supposed to be funny from Liverpool. So I was given, for the first time, and the magazine had been running since 1728, a job was created of humour editor. They'd never had a humour editor. Nobody had ever had a humour editor before. What the heck is that? So I became the humour editor on the Saturday Evening Post. And typically for that publisher, the first project she gave me as humour editor was to put a book together about AIDS for children.
Now, before you moved on to that, because that's really interesting, especially all the celebrities you managed to bring in to work with you. That was really quite an achievement, wasn't it? Didn't she have to get rid of somebody in order to create a job for you?
She did, yeah. She tended to act on a moment's impulse. And she was very impulsive. So suddenly she's face to face with a Liverpudlian in Indiana. I'm the only Liverpudlian, the only living Liverpudlian in Indiana. So she knows she has to capture me and bring me into her little zoo. And she does, by offering me money, which is great, and offering me a job in my first week in the US. So that's good. And then on my first day there, I'm walking in thinking, how great am I? And she stops me in the foyer and says, oh, don't go back to the editorial department yet. I've got to go and fire somebody to make room for you. Right, welcome to Publishing America, yeah, style. And indeed, it was so funny because this guy came out about half an hour later. He said, you the English guy? And he's carrying a cardboard box with all his tat in. And I said, yeah. He said, well, good luck working here. And off he goes. And I'm led down this corridor past all the editors' rooms. And I come to mine, and they're taking his name off the door. And they're putting mine up in its place. It's like, whoa, it wasn't like this at the Beano. Strange place. Very strange place. All history now.
You got on well with her. I think lots of people
She loved me.
struggle, but you got on really
She
well
loved me.
with her, didn't
No,
you?
she was a publisher. You know, publishers are very peculiar. Apart from the publisher of this, who's not peculiar at all, Matt, a bit. But most publishers are, you know, they're a bit like James Bond villains. All that's missing is the little pussycat in their lap. You know, they are like that. Bloody psychopaths, a lot of them, in my experience.
And those words that make it into here, you've called them all sorts of things in here.
I do call them all sorts of things,
yeah.
yes. There's a reason why my book is called Argh. I don't know how you pronounce it. I still don't know. You know, it's the cry of alarm. There's only one thing I can call it.
There's lots of frustration.
Yeah. It's a great word. And I've probably said that more often than anybody else on this planet due to my choice of career.
So where do you go from there?
Where do I go from there? Well, from, where am I? Marvel, the Saturday Evening Post. Yeah. Well, Marvel opened all these doors. And one of the doors it opened was TV. Like this. Marvel opened the door because I'm sitting at my desk one day and I'm not like other editors. I like to promote stuff, you know, and I like to say, look, aren't I great? or what we're doing. Isn't it great? Please read it. And I, on a whim, wrote to Melvyn Bragg, who at that time was the producer of a fantastic documentary TV series. Well, he still is, actually. He's still putting it out, called The South Bank Show for LWT, London Weekend Television. So I sent this letter to him in London, and to my surprise, I remember dropping it in the box and thinking, I wonder if he's going to do that. Because I thought, The South Bank Show, it's pretty sophisticated and classy, and my suggestion was, why don't you do a show about Marvel Comics? We were celebrating our 50th anniversary, and in the letter I sold it to him by saying, we go all the way back to the 30s, and it really captures American culture, what we've done from the 30s up to the present day at that point. Anyway, I got a letter from him saying, yeah, come and see me. So I go in to see Melvyn Bragg. We admire each other's hair. And so he says, we want to do it. We want to do this show. But none of my producers know anything about comics. So would you produce it yourself? To which, as a Liverpudlian, I say, yeah, sure. And then walking out the room and thinking, how on earth do you produce the South Bank Show? Because it's like, the best kind of documentary ever. But what happened next is he gives me massive budget and he gives me a camera crew. And as this camera crew will tell you, if you've got a camera crew, you can do anything, because there's nothing else. It's all about making somebody look good on the camera, The rest of it is baloney. So off I go to New York City with a camera crew from London, and I interview all the people I want to interview. Number one being the wonderful Stan Lee. And again, talk about privilege. He'd been my hero since I was 7. And now I can ask him any question I like. It was fantastic. I had a blast, learned exactly how to make a TV documentary, thanks to the kindness of the LWT people, who were great. The camera crew was fantastic. And then back, in the editing suite, just learning, do this, do that, try this, drop this in here, and all the wonders you can do. And finding that, if you put a magazine together, if you put a comic together, you can do a TV show as well. It's just the same thing, putting the things in the right order and telling a story. And this story is one I wanted to hear myself and see myself anyway, the story of Marvel Comics. So it was quite a buzz and quite a visual treat, because when you actually have comic book artwork, it looks great on screen, and you blow it up. Comic books, it's always brought down to this little A4 size. But, in reality, we draw big. So it's all massive, and you capture that on screen very nicely. So to cut from talking heads to amazing artwork, boy, we had a show. And it worked. And Melvyn was very easy to work with. The way he did it was he said, yes, do it. See you in 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, you invite him down to the editing suite, and he comes in and he sits there with a little notebook, watches what you've put together, and then hands you a list, might be 6 or 7 things on it. He says, just make those changes. And you look at them, and every single one of them is bang on the button, because he's got the clear mind. He's seeing it for the first time. You're so close to it that there might be obvious things you've missed out. And then that allowed me to pitch other ideas to him, and so I did a few South Banks, and it was always a thrill and a buzz, because it would be working on shows I wanted to do, that I had an interest in.
You did say I think he's your favourite boss that you've ever worked for.
It'd be either him or Giles Brandreth. But Giles and I were more we bossed each other. But 2 delightful guys, absolutely, and they should be knighted, if knighting means anything, which it doesn't really, does it? So why bother? They should be running the country, the 2 of them. That's for sure.
Lovely photo of you and Giles actually in your book. Tell us a little bit about the AIDS project, because that's really quite an achievement at the time, because there were quite a few barriers that were getting in the way.
Well, I was a barrier. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to know anything about AIDS. All I knew, this is way back in time now, and this is when we'd heard about it. Everybody heard about it, but nobody really knew anything about it. They knew it was killing people and it was homosexuals related to, but nobody knew anymore. It was like a plague had descended upon the planet. And I was losing friends left, right and centre because, you know, my time in the theatre, I'd met so many people who suddenly I had, oh, he's dead. The lurgy got him. And I'm like, holy cow, it was wiping out so many of my friends. But I didn't want to know anything more. I didn't want to, you know, ignorance is bliss. And then suddenly I'm charged with put a book together about AIDS. And I was sat looking at a blank wall for 2 days thinking, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. But I got to do it because I want to keep this job. And then I thought, well, how do I do this? Because there's a lot of people like me out there who won't want to read this. In that case, I've got to put something together that I would actually read. And it sounds silly now, but the way I decided to go was to bring in celebrities, which is the obvious route. Back then it wasn't. No celebrity had attached their name to the word AIDS at that point, apart from Rock Hudson. It was only because he had it, not because he was supporting it in any way. So I got my little diary out and I just had a few addresses of a few celebrities at that point. And I sent off a letter to them because my idea was the only thing we can really hope, we're not going to find a cure, but maybe we can, if I can bring in enough celebrities to do something in this book, we can get rid of the stigma that's attached to that word AIDS at this point. And I thought, well, that's quite a big thing to do. So I sent off a letter saying, will you allow your name to be used in this book? Send anything. It can be a photo signed. It can be an old school essay. It can be a poem, piece of music. You name it, anything. Just to show you don't mind having your name linked to this word. And I sent off these letters without much hope, because there was a general feeling that nobody, we don't go near that. And happily, I was very surprised. A few days later, I got a call at my office, and is that Tim Quinn? I said, yes, this is Yoko Ono. I'd like to help with your book. And as soon as I had Yoko's name, I was able to go to the LA Times and say, we're putting this book together. We're in search of celebrities. Yoko Ono's come in on it. I'm putting the call out. Contact Tim Quinn at Saturday Evening Post Office. Woof! Bless them. Theatrical people, musical people, the people across the arts had been waiting for this, and they all descended on my office. And it was such a high for me, because suddenly I'd come out of my little comic book box that I'd built around myself. I do comics. And I was working on another project that was fantastic. So it was very moving, and did what we could do under those circumstances at that point in time. And yeah, I'm very proud of it. And as crazy as it seemed at the point at that time that, you know, the humour editor do a book about AIDS, there was method in the madness of the publisher, I think, there. And it's, yeah, down through time, that's led to all sorts of other things that I've done as well.
It gave you some incredible contacts. I mean,
did
you had contacts from both sides of the
water. It was the biggest
as well.
names at that point. It was the biggest names. Elton John, of course, yeah, surprise. Gene Wilder, who was the Pope.
You got a letter from the Pope.
I got a letter from the Pope. Yeah, I was back to my old Catholic roots. So I'm going to get him in. The cast of Cheers. Cheers was the big comedy show at that point. Gene Wilder, Jane Fonda. The list just, I think we ended up with about 100 pages, you know, and 100 different celebrities of all types. Chrissy Hinckley, is that the name? Chrissy? Oh God, it's so long ago now. But you know, so we had models. Hugh Hefner, bless him, publisher of Playboy, and and the Pope. Both ends of this peculiar spectrum,
yes.
Just a bit. So yeah, good.
Really successful.
It was, well, yeah, I don't know how you judge that, but yeah, for me it was.
For you it was.
You know, it was. I grew through that. And yeah, you felt you were doing something. You weren't solving the problem, but you were doing something. I think a lot of people hold back because, well, this isn't going to solve the problem, is it? No, chances are we'll never solve the problems of the world, but we can help. And that is enormous, you know.
So what was the reason why you ended up back in the UK then?
Why did I end up back in the UK? Well, several reasons really, and I was jumping backwards and forwards all the time. But one of the reasons was my wife. She became ill, unfortunately, and at some point I said, "So where do you want to live?" The career can go on the back burner, and expecting her to say Indiana, which is where she grew up, and she said Merseyside. Of course she would, an Indiana girl. So where else could she possibly want to live but on Merseyside? And it turned out to be, a really cool move. I was away for 45 years, which is a long time. Hadn't planned to come back, not because I disliked it. I adored it. But as the years went on, the thought of coming back didn't, it was a different place, a different time, and I didn't. I guess my fear was if I came back, I would just see ghosts everywhere. I'd expect my mum to come cycling up the path and all of this. So it proved to be difficult. But when I did land back in Merseyside, I found all sorts of work coming from every direction. And Merseyside became a place of today as much as the happy memories of the 50s and 60s while I was here. That's great, and it's sort of top and tailing, and that'll suit me. That suits me no end, And it's great to come back to Merseyside and find it thriving still, or again, despite it's much like my own career. Boy, ups and downs of Liverpool life, but always looking up. I think there's great. There's no place like it. There is no place like it. Everybody bangs on it like that about Liverpool, but it's a fact. It makes me laugh every day.
So then you started to do little bits and bobs, including television.
Little bits and bobs.
Little
Is
bits
that
and
how
bobs.
you got it?
Little bits and bobs.
That's my career. That
Such a
I should have called my book
varied
"Little Bits and Bobs."
Well, I was thinking about when you went on This Morning, for example. You started to sort of venture out and try different things, doing more on TV.
Yeah.
How did you find that?
How did I find This Morning? You have to read the book to find out about that. This Morning, that wonderful TV show.
You didn't like Cliff Richard. You didn't like.
No, but not because of now. If somebody asked me about Cliff now, I love him because poor guy, what he's been through, thanks to idiot BBC and the police. I've forgotten I put the boot into Cliff in there. Shame on me. You've got to be careful who you put the boot into, don't you?
Well, you weren't very enthused by him. I don't think it's anything personal.
Oh no, and let me readdress that balance.
I think you said he was boring.
I'm sure he will. He probably found me equally boring. But yeah, I think if you read the book, it comes over a lot nicer than
it does.
How it did there. Yeah. Is Cliff one of the greats of British rock and roll? Yeah. There. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the Beatles. You really are a big fan.
Just a bit.
Just a bit.
Well, again, they're life-changing, aren't they? Like Enid Blyton. As soon as you pick up an Enid Blyton book, your life changes. The Beatles, I remember the moment I heard them. It was in January 1963, and it was a very cold winter, one of the coldest on records, and I came in from playing in the snow, frozen. I was dressed in my tat to play in the snow, torn jeans. This was before torn jeans were cool. This is when torn jeans were like, because you didn't have any better jeans, so you were poor, and a ripped sweater, and I came in, and out of the wireless came "Please Please Me," this song, and I stopped in my tracks. I'd never heard anything like it. The world had never heard anything like it before. January 1963, and it was like the lights going on, and the 60s started there and then, and I don't think there's been a day since January 1963 where I haven't mentioned the Beatles at some point. And I was playing them before I came here today, an album, Hard Day's Night album, that goodness knows how many times I've played that. And it's as fresh today as it ever was. I don't understand the Beatles. They are a phenomenon, without a doubt. And you can't figure it. because is it good music? Yeah. Are they great guys? Yeah. But there's something so much more when those four came together. Just absolutely extraordinary. But it was an amazing time. And I'll be the first to say, it wasn't only the Beatles. These 300 other plus bands and writers and illustrators and poets across Liverpool at that time. Amazing time to be a kid. I think it was because of them. Even though I didn't know what I was going to do when I left school, I knew I could do anything I wanted.
On
Thanks
the back
to
of
them.
that, you loved Enid Blyton. Maybe you could tell us a bit about your love for Enid Blyton, and your relationship with her own daughter.
Yeah, well, I went up the faraway tree when I was 7, and I've yet to come down, and I'm not coming down. An amazing writer, and if you've got kids at home who aren't getting into reading, pick up any Enid Blyton book. I don't care what it is. Pick up any Enid Blyton book. She wrote 700 or more. And by the time you're halfway down the first page, the child will be hooked. That's one hell of a power. There are certain people who say, she's too simple, her writing's too simple. You try writing simple. It ain't simple. It's amazing. So, she gave me a love of reading. My mum and dad and my brother gave me a love of reading. But Enid was somebody who I collected a lot during my childhood. I still got that collection at home. And years later, I'm sitting at an editorial meeting at Marvel Comics, and my boss says, right, outside of superheroes, anybody got any ideas what else we can do? And I said, why don't we do a comic book based on Enid Blyton's characters? And there's a murmur goes round the table. And these young editors there, because suddenly I'm the older editor, and there's a guy over here, he said, we can't do Enid Blyton. I said, why not? She's racist. And there's another editor over here who says, we can't do Enid Blyton, she's sexist. And there's another one over here who says, no, she's fascist. All rubbish, of course. But they believe this, because they've read it in some paper somewhere. But luckily my boss at that time was fascist, sexist, racist guy himself, so he didn't mind. So he said, go set up a meeting with Enid Blyton's company. So I did, and they had an office just off the Strand in London, and it was there that I met Gillian Baverstock, who was the elder daughter of Enid Blyton, and she'd been running her mother's company since Enid sadly had gone down with Alzheimer's years before and then died in the end of the 60s. And she was everything you'd want Enid Blyton to be. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful person. And we got on like a house on fire instantly. My memory of that first meeting is of, you're usually given tea when you go and meet people, a cup of tea, all right. She goes out herself, Gillian goes out herself and comes in with this tray of the finest china, and it's rattling. A bit like Julie Walters, but she's coming over to the table and she says, I must show you this wonderful book of my mother's, because you'll love it. And then she starts climbing a stepladder while still carrying the... She was an amazing person. She had both hips replaced, and 6 months later she was riding elephants in India. She was gung-ho, and I always found myself about 20 paces behind trying to keep up with her. An amazing woman. We shared this passion for instilling a love of reading in children. And we constantly moaned about the state of magazines and children's comic books, saying they're not catering for kids as they used to. There's a lot of tat on the newsstands now. And the reason kids tend to buy a comic these days is because of the stupid free gift plastered on the front, rather than the content of the comic. Anyway, we moaned for several years. And at some point we decided to form our own publishing company and put out a magazine that we felt would instill a love of reading in kids. And we brought in a lot of my friends from Marvel to recreate the world's most famous fairy tale characters and to bring them back from the clutches of Disney to their European roots.
This was Blue Moon?
This was Blue Moon. We called the comic Blue Moon. And... to cut ahead, just a few weeks before Gillian died, we were speaking on the phone and she said it was the thing she was most proud of in her life. So that, to this day, fills me with wonder and joy. And I probably would point to it myself and say, that beats everything else. It's a joyous publication. long gone now, but happily remembered by the few people who saw it and picked it up. Kids, teachers in schools were using it as in literacy hour, you know. So it was, and that was the whole plan, really, you know. So yeah, good stuff. It's not difficult to instill a love of reading in kids, but you just got to hit them with the right stuff at the right time, and then you got them for life. You know, a bit like the Jesuit fathers. Give me a boy till he's 7, I've got him for life. Give a boy and a girl the right book at the right age and you've got them for life. It's that easy, you know, and schools should be doing it. But schools, perish the thought of me putting the boot into schools. But schools sometimes don't get it, you know.
Well, you were doing quite a lot of work with schools over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Done a fair bit of work setting up bookshops and doing some really nice work with St. Vincent's.
Yeah.
The first comic book for the blind ever in the world. Tell us a bit about that.
As far as I know, well, I have over the last 20 years, actually, I've been working in schools, basically going in and showing kids how easy it is. So it's not brain surgery, you know, telling stories in pictures is not, it's easy. And it's fun, it's enormous fun. And all you need is a character. And once you can create a character, then you can tell story after story after story. So that's what I have been doing. And just a couple of, about 6 weeks ago now, I was invited to lunch with Ken Dodd, hero of mine from my childhood. And I found myself sitting opposite this extraordinary man. Not Ken, somebody equally delightful as Ken. And it turned out he was a head teacher. First of all, he said, I'm a head teacher, and my heart sank, because you don't want to be sat at lunch opposite a head teacher. But this is a head teacher like no other I've encountered on this planet. And it is so true that only Ken Dodd could have introduced the two of us. And he's the head teacher of a school called St. Vincent's, a very famous school in Merseyside for the blind. And over that lunch, he started telling me more and more about the work he does there, and the gist of it being that it used to be that, you know, children would come there to feel safe, be safe, kept safe. And that's not how he views it now. They come there so they realise they can do anything on this planet. And when he heard that I'd done stuff for Marvel Comics, he hit the table and he said, "You got to do a comic for the blind." To which I said, "Well, great, yeah." And again, much like with Melvyn Bragg, I walked away from this conversation going, how the hell do you do this? But we're doing it. And thanks to Dr. John Patterson, head of St. Vincent's, we've got the first few pages together now. I'm working with a collaborator of mine over in the US. This guy has done all the comics I haven't worked on. So he's worked on things like the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo and many, many more. Rocky and Bullwinkle, an old favourite of mine. And the idea behind the comic book is that it's set at St. Vincent's School. And the ideas have come from the students themselves. And the students are looking out. They're hearing the world around them. And they're not happy with the way the world is going at this moment. I don't think anybody is.
No.
It's a bit of a mess. And they decide to do something about it. They decide to help. And how can they best help? Well, they form a superhero group. And their head teacher guides them in this. And their idea is, just as I said before, you might not be able to solve the problem, but you can help. And so in the first issue, they're actually looking at the problem of black fly. Now, black fly in Africa, in certain countries in Africa, are laying eggs in water systems, and the eggs are making people go blind. So it's something very close to the heart of these students, something they know about. And they come up with a way to help with that problem. And at the end of the issue, they turn to the reader and say, do you want to join us? Do you want to be a part of our band? Because we might not have superpowers, but we do have super compassion for our fellow man. And all these ideas have come from the students themselves and the talks I've had with them and the way they think, which I've found quite extraordinary. So it is an amazing place. Visually, St. Vincent's is like Hogwarts plus. And the students and the head teacher are even more exciting than Hermione and Harry and that band. So quite inspirational for me to be working with such people.
With such incredible insight.
Oh, the insight, yeah, I use words like that a lot, that you go in to these blind students and they have such insight into the world. And they should be running it. And the more you turn on the news these days and you see who is running it, who's running this? You know, it's like somebody's writing an insane comic book, except we wouldn't print this because it's too far-fetched. It's such a nonsense. Whereas I go into this school and the reality that they've created in the school is much more, yeah, that's it. That's what we had once upon a time, I think. When I was a boy growing up in Liverpool, there was a common sense around. And we were getting better. And there was a feeling in the 60s that we were getting better and better. And that was the plan, that we would, bit by bit by bit. And I suspect we could trace that all the way back to the formation of the National Health Service, which was such a fabulous idea. Health for all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll sign up for that. I'll sign up for education for all. These simple things, you know, that Charles Dickens was banging on about in the 1840s. There's certain things, common sense, that, yeah, let's get behind that. So to find this school, to find this man running this school, and
this
to find these
Dr.
students.
John Patterson,
Dr. John
isn't it?
Patterson, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's as an exciting a guy as any I've worked with. And I've worked with some pretty exciting guys, from Charlie Caroli, the clown, to Stan Lee, to Melvin Bragg, to Dr. John, or the Doc, as I call him. What will happen next? Watch this space.
That's what I was going to say, taking the words out of my mouth. Where are we going? Where's mighty Tim Quinn going now?
Well, I'm happy to be working with Bay TV. Thank you, Bay TV. Who it's Liverpool's, well, Merseyside's own TV station. Mm-hmm. If ever a city demanded a TV station, it's Liverpool. Every time we go out with the cameras, we find stories everywhere. There's 10,000 stories waiting to be told on any given day. The wonder is that there hasn't been a TV station here before, you know. I mean, this is such an amazing opportunity for Merseyside to have a TV station. And I'm working on quite a few different programs with them. Interviewing people I want to interview, people who I love. So guys from the Mersey Beat era who, you know, have stories to tell. A couple of days from now, we're off to interview Johnny Hamp, who was one of the best TV producers ever. Anybody who is going grey out there and has been in this area for long will remember a TV series called Scene at 6:30, and he was a producer on that. So the opportunities are fantastic, you know, incredibly. It's Liverpool. The creation is exploding out of the paving stones every day.
You've interviewed quite a few famous bands, as well as, you know, celebrities, key people. Who is your favourite? My
favourite?
That you've interviewed so far?
I suspect it might be Johnny Hamp, who's coming up on Wednesday, because his story is amazing to tell. I was chatting with the Mersey Beats, a favourite band of mine, a while back. They were fascinating. Everybody actually, no, everybody, because everybody's story is different and interesting. You know, people are so interesting, whether they're famous or not, you know. How we all cope with getting through this peculiar life on this peculiar rock as we scream through outer space is kind of interesting, you know, more so for me than any novel, really. It's how people deal with the ups and downs of their lives.
Few short questions. Who's your favourite superhero and why?
It has to be Spider-Man. And simple reason, when I bought the first issue all those years ago, I was pretty young. And I remember looking at the cover thinking, Spider-Man, that's a really stupid name. And it was. It's like saying Flyman, which sounds absurd, Flyman. But now, of course, the name Spider-Man is so cool And the reason it's cool is because of what Stan Lee did with that character. He made a really stupid name cool. You do that. So I'm ever hopeful that the name Timothy will one day become incredibly cool. But I love that first issue because in it I found that Spider-Man, the guy behind the mask, was still at school. He was bullied. He was laughed at by girls. And he loved books. It was me. Everything about him was me. So that's my favourite superhero because it's me. Except I have not been bitten by a radioactive spider. Been bitten by fleas when I was in the circus.
Yes, I read that. Yeah.
Not by. They weren't radioactive, sadly. Else I would be Flea Man today, which I'm not. You'll be pleased to know. So.
Illustrations. What have you enjoyed drawing the most?
The Dole for a while back in. No. What have I enjoyed drawing most? Probably sitting on my grandmother's lap, drawing as a kid and knowing I could draw the world. And possibly the best thing I ever drew was the very first thing I drew, or in my memory. And that is going right back to the start of my story, when Mum put this charcoal in my hand and I looked at my massive bedroom wall and I was going to draw on it and I stopped and I thought, what should I draw? Mum, what should I draw? And she said, draw something you like. What do you like? And I actually slowed everything down. What do I like? I like eggs. So I drew a hard-boiled egg, and it looked like a hard-boiled egg on my wall. And that was the first thing I drew. But I didn't stop there. I then put an eye on it, and a nose on it, and a little smiley mouth, and some scribble. And by chance, it looked like a hedgehog. And when my mother walked into the room, how did you know how to draw a hedgehog? Well, of course I didn't. But all a hedgehog is in a drawing is an egg-shaped scribble and a little smiley face. So it's dead easy to draw. And because it was easy to draw, I was then able to draw him having adventures, doing stuff. So that's probably the most important thing I ever drew, hedgehog or egg with scribble sticking out of it. Yeah.
Thematically, you seem to have a fascination with time travel, I think, with what I've seen of your work.
Well, history. It's grown up in Crosby. And you walk around Crosby and you see the shrapnel marks on the walls. You walk down to the river and you picture the Viking ships coming up from way back. So all around us is history. And when I was growing up in the 50s, no rebuilding really had started since the war. So Liverpool was a bomb site, but without the bombs falling. So it was quite an exciting place. And my brother and I would indeed play on bomb sites. It was quite a buzz that we got out of that.
I think your mum was a bit annoyed with Hitler. Didn't she feel that he'd personally bombed her library?
She did. Well, Mum worked as the junior librarian at Waterloo Library, which was just up the road from here, and turned left in Church Road. And it was a beautiful library. I got a picture of it at home. Beautiful old Victorian building. And I have Mum's diaries to this day, and it's May 1941. You didn't want to be in Liverpool in May 1941 or in Waterloo. And she writes that she walks, to the library and it's not there. It's gone. And she always told me, that was the saddest moment of her life. Her beloved library had gone, still smoking when she got there. And she always told me the story, Hitler bombed my library. So in this little pea brain, as a kid, I had the image of Hitler in his bomber looking down. There's Hazel Quinn's library. We dropped the bomb, snapped. What a swine. It's true what they say about him. Stinker. Bombing a library.
I think he's had lots of not nice stuff about him when you were able to get that across in your comics.
Yeah. Well, Hitler. Well, I have used Hitler as a comedy character quite a lot in my funny comics because I find him hilarious. And a lot of people say you can't do that. You can't find Nazis hilarious. Yes, you can. They're hilarious. And if you take a look at them, the master race. This is the master race. Think of the four guys who created the master race. You got Hitler. You got little gimpy Goebbels hobbling along. You got great big fat Goring. Bursting out of his uniform with all his medals. And you got Himmler looking like, the serial killer. This is the master race, for goodness sake. If everybody just laughed at the buggers in the early days, so I put them in many a comic strip because they're like it's like Laurel and Hardy meets the Marx Brothers or something. You know, there's such an absurd look to them. But somehow Hitler had this power to pull the masses in to worship him. Thank goodness nothing like that could ever happen again. Ooh, we would be living in a dump of a Trump if that happened again, wouldn't we? You know, how can somebody so absurd come to power? Beggars belief, doesn't it, America? You know? When will we ever learn?
There's a nice little story, just to sort of wind things up, about your granddad. Wind things down, really, rather than wind things up.
Wind them up with your granddad.
There's a lovely story about your granddad who fought in World War One, and he really didn't want you to ever find yourself in that situation yourself, and I think he sort of threatens to shoot you in both feet before he'll let you go out and fight.
Yes, the L method's the best. The L tough love, we called it, I think. Well, no, my granddad, and his blood runs through my veins, roars through my veins on many an occasion. He was born at just the wrong time to ensure he had to serve in 2 world wars. And he was gassed in the First World War. And he had this loathing of the hierarchy from his first week serving, really, where he saw the baloney and stupidity of it. He lost every one of his childhood friends. He was the survivor of his generation that he knew. So he was the most passionate anti-war guy I knew, but his rage, he would start every day reading the newspapers and the language that would come out. And come 62, when there was the Bay of Pigs, or the missile crisis, Cuban Missile Crisis, and it looked like we were going to nuclear war. So, you know, it wouldn't really have shooting me in both feet, wouldn't really have done much. And as I was too young for even the stupid government to call up, I think I would have taken my chances. But he loved his grandchildren with a passion, and he was not going to let us go the route he had to go. So I think back, yeah, you know, we want more people like that. Please stop playing the game, because read a history book. It's bonkers, you know. Close your eyes, look at the world. Look at the people of the world with your eyes closed. We're all the same, all the same. So, thank you, Pop. Before John Lennon was banging on about all you need is love and give peace a chance, I was getting that from my grandfather, and he'd been there and done that, and didn't think much of it at all. On that happy note.
On that happy note.
Except it is. He's a great guy, and I'm overjoyed to have had him as my grandfather, and he's still here every day.
I really enjoyed reading it. I'm not just saying that.
Thank you very much. I kind of enjoyed writing it. There were a few down moments where I suddenly realised that most people I'm writing about are now dead. But that's what happens when you do an autobiography. I mean, what's left after, you know, people say, now what? Well, once you've written your autobiography, really the next thing is, oh, now I've got to die, because you've done it, you know. So now I'm going to coast into the sunset and die. But before that, I have a feeling a few extraordinary things will happen as well.
I think so too. It's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to be in this right blend, South Road, Waterloo bookshop. Love it.
Thank you very much.